Praha 5 Police Station, Prague, Czech Republic. November 28th. Eva was trembling, tears in her eyes. This isn't me. I don't know anything about this. Your history of criminal behavior indicates otherwise, said Sabatka. So what did you do? Come home with a new brew ready to strike? Found out your mother had a change of heart? Killed her to keep her quiet? Is that it? Killed her? She's dead? She cried. No, that's not. What's going on? Where is she? Crew chortled. You tell us. Sabatka slammed her fist down on the table, jolting Eva into silence. Ms. Kolikoff, you're going to want to be a bit more forthcoming with us. The courts being what they are these days, it can take months to get you to trial. And honestly, a lot of prisoners come in with the sniffles. Hold up, Crew interrupted. We don't have time for... Give me a minute, Sabatka warned, then turned back to Eva. I'm going to highly recommend you tell us what we want to know, or we'll have no reason to keep you in isolation. Do you understand me? Oh, come on, Crew vented. Give me 5 minutes alone with her. That's all we'll... Sabatka held a calming hand out to her partner, and he paused, looking away, barely keeping his frustration in check. Sabatka leaned close to Eva, squinting. I don't think you're going to tell us anything, she said. I think you'll stonewall to the end. And every minute I spend in here with you is another minute I'm not out there, hunting the damn virus. So if you're not going to come clean, tell me now so I can stop wasting my time. But I honestly don't know what this is all about. You have to believe me. Please. Crew clenched his fists, looking like he was on the verge of boiling over with fury. Listen, you spoiled brat, he seethed. It may not look it to you, but this city ain't dead yet. This is my home, even if I have to boil and sterilize every drop of water I use in the shower. It's still better than packing up and giving up. That's what you and your kind don't get, and it makes me sick. It's no great loss if Prague is wiped off the map, right? Well, you're wrong. He got to his feet, shoving the chair against the wall. It toppled over behind him. Eva jerked back, but he caught her by the hair, holding her tight, leaning in furiously. Tell us where the virus is, he yelled. We don't have time to watch you play innocent here. Tell us where it is, or I'm sending you to the most crowded cell I can find. I swear to God. Eva was crying, trying to get free of his grip, pleading. Please. She sobbed. Please, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. Please. Crew, come on, said Sabatka, stepping into the hall. It's not going to work. Leave it. Fuck it. Crew growled and slammed her head down into the table with such force her nose started to tingle. She tasted blood in the back of her throat, her eyes swirling with light. Crew stormed to the door, putting his head in his hands, trying to regain his composure. You're going into lockup, he growled, and you're not getting out. Wait, Eva sputtered, reaching out to him feebly. Too bad Mama can't help you now, He smirked and left the room, slamming the door so powerfully it sounded like cracking wood. A thin shaft of light beamed in along the bottom. Outside, shadows moved across the doorway, and she heard the inspectors talking again. Forgot my keys, called Crew. Lock it for me. Footsteps came closer, a jingling, a sorting of keys, and Eva tensed. How much do you think she knows? Asked Sabatka. Who gives a shit? We've got to keep working the angles. We got any leads yet? Crew said, hushed. A few hits. It'll take us a while to cover them all. You got time? Apparently, just a few days. Any ideas on where to start looking? None, really. It's complicated by her, Yeah. So, let's print out a list and pick a place at random. Just then, Eva heard the faint ring of a cell phone. Crew answered, his voice quiet and more distant as he walked away from the door. Then a click as the phone shut, and he called to his partner. We've got to go. Something big in the West End. Captain says Sestak's asking for us directly. Hurried footsteps disappeared into echoes, and Eva was left in awful silence, the wedge of light cutting straight across her ankles. She breathed slowly, shakily, waiting. Hello, she asked the darkness. Anyone coming to get me? She couldn't hear a thing beyond her own breathing. Carefully, quietly, she got out from her seat and edged toward the door. No sounds at all. She touched the doorknob tentatively, listening for a sound, a voice, anything to make her pause. She turned the knob gently, and it clicked, popping the door open slightly. She creaked it out further and peeked outside. The hallway was yellowing like old paper. Filthy water streaked the floor, no people in sight. Eva leaned her head further out, checking both ways, and saw nothing. Nothing to stop her. She shivered. I'm leaving the room now, she whispered. Less than a meter from the room, Eva heard a scuffle up ahead, like a paper shifting. She froze, eyes wide. She heard a loud sigh and a grunt. She searched the hallway for some place to hide. There, a few steps ahead, another door off to her right, half closed, lights off. She waited, listened. The air filters in the ceiling hummed and hissed, and the fan somewhere nearby ground its gears with a grating rumble. Then, another scuffle. Footsteps. Eva held her breath and made a dash for the room, slipping inside and back behind the door, the darkness piercing after the light of the hallway. She let the breath out slowly, evenly, trying to hear outside again. Footsteps now, closer, and she could see through the back of the door, black boots outside the room, paused, breathing. She heard breathing, a long pause. The boots slid back a bit, then turned, and she could hear muttering as the footsteps got further away. A calm, even pace. Eva exhaled again, her lungs loosening a bit. She leaned closer to the hinges now, saw into the hall, empty as before. She turned around to leave when she noticed, back against the wall next to her, a computer workstation. The screen was off, but its power light was on, casting a pale green glow across the room. A police workstation. She carefully and quietly slid over to the chair, sitting down. It creaked a bit, and she strained not to move anymore. She turned the brightness on the screen all the way down with the dial on the front, then powered it on. She could make out the words, but took a moment to take in all the information. There was a search box in the corner, the cursor flashing on and off, inviting input. Checking over her shoulder, Eva typed, Kolikov. She hit enter. The screen refreshed in a second, showed 2 entries. Eva's file, and Dasa Kolikov, her mother. She hovered the cursor over her mother's name, then clicked her own, bringing up a file that included her passport photo and a few stills from the security cameras on the train. She skimmed the file quickly, pausing only to try and discern the meaning of 17-5. No luck there, so she tore through the data, deleting and fabricating 64 information as fast as possible. By the time she finished, they'd know nothing about her at all. She smiled at a job well done, and hit the back button, diving into her mother's file. What she found was worse than she'd expected. Arrest warrant number 058833153. Conspiracy to commit murder. Bioweapons Act violations. Ava involuntarily put a hand to her mouth, gasped quietly. "Oh, Mom," she said. "What happened?" She heard a crackle in the room, but had no time to react. A hand wrapped around Ava's mouth, pushing down, and she couldn't breathe. She flailed, cracking her wrist against a desk and wasting the last of her breath on a scream no one could hear. Skipton House, London, England. November 28th. "I didn't expect to see you here so soon, Will," said the director as Carrie shuffled in the door, a pack of papers under his arm. He smiled weakly, making his way to the chair opposite his boss's giant throne of a seat, and almost fell into it. Janice trailed him like an impressive shadow, the kind that outshines its owner. The room was like a photo gallery, a shrine to people the director knew or had been photographed with. Carrie could see former prime ministers, rock stars, athletes, and famous scientists. One picture of the current prime minister had a message scrawled across the front in silver ink. "We'll beat this together," the slogan he'd won on. Everything about the room was old school. The desk looked to be over 100 years old. The lamps and general decor smelled of Victorian spit and polish. There was a large map on the back wall, the biggest single space in the room not yet turned into a mosaic of tiny frames, showing the British Empire sometime before the First World War. The director was a man who loved glory, who killed and mounted it on his walls to show his dominion over it. "Sorry to barge in like this, sir," Carrie said, trying to gather some of the papers back into something resembling a pile. He knocked an ink blotter off the edge of the desk and ducked down after it, smacking his head against the desk on the way. He came back up holding his head and the blotter, while his papers drifted out of his hands and onto the floor. Janice sighed loudly. Sorry," Carrie muttered again. "Not at all, Will, not at all," boomed the director, apparently enjoying how his office intimidated people. "Listen, would you like a drink? And you, miss?" "No, sir. Thank you, sir," said Janice flawlessly. If you don't," Carrie began, before Janice kicked his shin so subtly she nearly didn't move. "I mean, no, sir. I'm good. Thanks." The director nodded, leaned back in his chair, and started spinning an ornate letter opener on his desk in a way that made Carrie sweat. He grabbed the top paper from his pile and nervously, shakily, handed it over. "We've found something, sir," he said, tapping the paper lightly. "Something that could be quite bad." The director took the paper lightly, nudged his reading glasses up on his long, pointed nose, and sniffed loudly, like he was jarring his brain into gear. He smacked his lips once or twice, squinted, and then his face hardened abruptly. He looked up. Carrie immediately looked away. "What is this?" the director asked, his voice low. Janice?" Carrie invited. Janice cleared her throat to speak, but the director leaned forward suddenly, a low growl in his voice. "This is a senior-level meeting, my dear. You're excused." "But sir," protested Carrie, "Janice is not a part of this conversation, Will. You are excused, miss." Janice blinked, confused, but then put on her more composed face and carefully backed out of the room without a word. Carrie was left alone with the stone-faced man with the old colonial empire at his back, and he felt horribly alone. "You were stationed in Madrid, weren't you, Will?" the director said, creaking back in his chair. Yes, sir. 8 years. So, you're a team player. You know what's at stake here. I don't need to go over how a little information can do a lot of wrong. Carrie shook his head slowly. No, sir. Excellent. So tell me about these papers, Will. It's the transmission logs for Zemus Pharmaceuticals, sir. It seems that they seem to be integrating vaccines into their booster shot program without, testing them. The director's expression remained unreadable. Are we sure about this? Yes, sir, we are. And we think we've found out why. Carrie handed over the next set of papers in the stack, a listing of communications in excruciating detail, complete with timestamps and origin addresses. At first, we thought Zemus had been, maybe compromised by some malicious persons, trying to, spread a virus through a booster shot, the director said, obviously quicker than Carrie had been. But, as you can see, sir, the bypass orders all came from a single person, a registered person, and we have good reason to believe he was the one making the inputs himself. The director looked up from the paper, his eyes boring into Carrie. Is this who I think it is? Yes, sir, I'm afraid so. The director laid the paper down on his desk, folded his hands above it, and closed his eyes. His jowls trembled as he breathed, and he looked like a beast from a nature video. So unreal you wouldn't have believed it existed. His brow furrowed slightly. He was thinking, and Carrie felt like he was intruding on a private moment. Will, the director said, opening his eyes, staring coldly at Carrie. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. He paused again, sniffed, his face twitching. I am removing you from your position in the department. But, sir, you are now working as my chief investigator. You report to me, and me alone. I want you to use your experience on the continent to keep things at home under better control. Starting with this Zemus mess. It must be dealt with quickly and quietly. No one but the two of us should hear of it. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, nodded Carrie, then shuddered. But, sir, Janice knows. What should we... Janice is replacing you as department head, of course. She's got a good head on her shoulders, I can tell. But even still, what she knows, without the backing evidence, that's inconsequential. From here on out, these secrets stay between us. Yes, sir. Zemus has a new booster coming out in 3 weeks, and I don't think anyone could stand the financial or political fallout if it were to be pulled over a scandal. Sir? The director leaned in close, eyes narrow, his voice so quiet, Carrie found himself leaning forward to hear. I've known this man my entire life. He is a good soul, Will. A very good fellow. And yet... His gaze shifted. He was looking past Carrie, but at nothing. Yet, I can see this being true. I can see him doing this because he thinks it's the best way to protect the public. Carrie nodded. But it's against the law. The director continued, and Carrie stopped nodding abruptly, frowning. And he has to learn to accept it. So I need you to talk to him, Will, and let him know that we know. And unless he quits now, it'll only be a matter of time before it gets out. Carrie swallowed. You tell him. Not for me, you understand. You tell him that he needs to submit those vaccines for proper testing and to follow normal procedure from now on." The director exhaled slowly. He means well, but one mistake could... He met Carrie's eyes, and for the first time, there was sadness in them. "One mistake could gut our country, Will. You have to make him understand." Motel Hospital, Prague, Czech Republic, November 28th. The rear stairwell of the hospital was dark and dank, littered with junk that had accumulated over years of disuse. Down on the ground level, biohazard canisters were strewn across the floor, scratched and worn by staff who had left long ago. No one had been in this shaft for some time. The only lighting came from the thin strip of red emergency beacons along the edge of the steps. Enuma faced the healer, his cold visage made demonic by the surroundings. She was exposed here, alone in a place where no one would find her body for weeks, if ever. Alone with a murderer. She gripped the railing with a slippery hand, her handheld flashlight dangling from the lanyard around her neck. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice cracking, her French precise, tentative. The healer observed her for a moment. "You know why I am here," he replied, rough and distorted through his mask. "You have information about LS-411. You will tell me now." He took a step forward, and Enuma held out a warning hand, her jaw setting. "I want to know what you will do if you find this strain. What are your orders?" "My orders are to diagnose and contain." "Contain how?" she asked, lowering her arm but not breaking eye contact. The healer didn't move for a moment, except to twitch his head slightly to the side. Containment requires the destruction of the host, usually by lethal injection. Sometimes, incineration is deemed necessary as well. Enuma nodded slowly, her eye twitching with fury. "So you find the sick and kill them? They did not do this to themselves. The ones that infected them are still out there, and you let them go?" The healer shook his head at her. "Euthanizing the general population is inefficient. It is not my commission. I contain only the vectors." "The vectors?" "The hosts that infect the rest. The closer to the source, the better. These diseases tend to be built poorly. They lose virulent qualities as they pass each generation. The closer to the source, the greater the effectiveness of containment. So if my patient is the vector for LS-411, I will perform my duty." Enuma crossed her arms, shaking her head. "That is unacceptable. I cannot let you do that." The healer stared up the stairwell, then back at Enuma. "You have confirmed the patient is here. Your permission is irrelevant." He turned and started up the stairs, the soft metal clang of his footsteps echoing. Enuma called after him as he reached the first landing. "This is one of the biggest hospitals in Europe," she said, her voice cracking with anger. "In this wing alone, we have 7 usable floors, with 1,000 patients per floor." The healer turned, stepping back down a few steps, staring at her ominously in the red light. She kept her arms crossed, standing her ground. "And I have not said if the patient is in this wing at all." There was a brief pause. A liquid dripped somewhere in the shadows, hitting a pool among the biohazard containers. It sounded thick. "What do you want?" the healer asked. "You must promise you will not kill him." "That is not in my power to promise." He shook his head. "Then I wish you good luck up there. Especially once I tell the police you broke in." The healer moved swiftly down the stairs, his footsteps silent as he closed the distance between them. Before Enuma could react, she was pinned against the railing, his mask hissing spent carbon dioxide into her face. "I can get the information from you however I choose," he breathed angrily. "I am not bound by your doctor's ethics." Her expression didn't change. "But I am, so I will never tell you. Never, unless you swear to leave him alive." Without warning, the healer grabbed Enuma by the throat, pushing her back against the concrete wall. His fingers tightened, but didn't finish the job. Enuma held her breath, terrified, but refused to betray any emotion. They stayed frozen, neither one budging. The healer let her go. "I will not euthanize your patient," he said, stepping away. "But you must show him to me now. No more delays." Enuma rubbed her neck for a moment, then nodded and took her flashlight in her hand again. "This way," she said, starting up the stairs. He followed close behind. There was a general grit to the steps that was slippery, yet rough. She couldn't see what it was, nor did she see the glass that crunched underfoot along the way. They moved slowly, cautiously, careful to avoid stepping on used needles. Moldy pillows, shredded gowns, and a blood-stained sink lay cracked along the way. "What is your name?" she asked as they passed the third floor. The healer thought for a moment. "We have no names. Your French is better than I thought." There was a pause as they walked. The healer sounded hesitant. "We are trained to communicate with medical personnel. You handle it well. I have had time to practice." Another half floor later, it spoke again. "What is your name?" "Dr. Enuma," she replied. "Fanta Enuma, Médecins Sans Frontières. I know your colleagues."
"And they know you too. Here. Wait here."
She left him standing on the steps and creaked open the fourth-floor fire door. She leaned into the hallway beyond, the pale light casting a soft shadow in the shaft next to him. The healer walked up behind the door, watching her carefully. "Doctor." "Enuma," came a voice, a man's, from the hall. Enuma jumped at the sound. She drifted further out, letting the door slide closed behind her, holding it open just enough for her hand to peek through. "Doctor LaRoche," she said, failing to sound as calm as she wanted to. "Is everything okay?" Dr. LaRoche was close now. The healer could see his shadow mixing with Enuma's under the door. Fine," he said, just grabbing some supplies for the floor. "Why are you using the back stairwell? It's not safe there, is it? There are discarded needles everywhere." The healer tensed, laying a hand on his machete.
"Oh no. I heard a young patient on the 5th floor talking about a special fort he had built back here, and I thought I should check it out."
"Really? The things kids dream up." "I know. It seemed silly to me, but..." The door pushed open more, and Dr. LaRoche's voice was near. The healer unsheathed his weapon, holding it ready. "Did you find anything?" LaRoche asked. "No," Enuma gasped. "No, nothing. Many discarded needles, as you said. I would not risk going in there. Who knows what people discarded?" Dr. LaRoche chuckled, but didn't move. The healer did not move either. "Might want to get the boy checked for dementia. Could be Waterloo or London 9. "Certainly not, I agree. I will order the tests." A pause, and then the door swung shut. The healer caught it with an impatient grab, pushing it open as he stepped past her. "You lie well," he said. "Which one is it?" Enuma led him down the hall to a frail man, wired to a dozen monitors. "This is the patient," she said solemnly. "My brother, Dr. Ajobi Enuma." Motel Hospital, Prague, Czech Republic, November 28th. Enuma took Ajobi's hand and rubbed his fingers gently. He opened his eyes. At first, he didn't notice his visitor, but when he caught a glimpse of the mask, he panicked, trying to climb up the back of his bed as if it were an escape route. "Shh, quiet, brother," Enuma said, placing a hand on his shoulder, gently pushing him back down. His heart monitor rang louder and louder, a red light flashing more urgently on the console above the bed. An emergency call button. The healer put a hand on his machete. "Quiet. Quiet now," Enuma said with a soft voice. "He is here to help you." She turned her gaze to the healer, hopeful. After a brief moment, he put his hands out, palms up, and bowed as a gesture of goodwill. It worked well enough. Ajobi's heart rate was calming fast. Enuma stroked her brother's head, and though he was much less agitated, his eyes were still wide with fear. "Ajobi and I came from Furke 3 years ago," she began. "What is Furke?" the healer interrupted. "Where is this place?" "What is it to you?" Ajobi asked, before breaking into a hoarse, dry cough. "If your infection began in another town, I must travel. I have no information that LS-411 is anywhere but Prague." "Furke Sedugu is in Côte d'Ivoire," Enuma said. "In Africa." The healer nodded slightly. "There are no synthetic diseases down there," Ajobi said, wincing at a sudden pain. "Whatever it is I have, I got it right here." "Besides," Enuma added, "they do not let sick doctors help in the relief." The healer tilted his head. "Relief," he echoed. "6 weeks ago," Enuma continued, "these lesions appeared on Ajobi's neck and chest." She held out his arm, showing a purplish patch no more than a few centimeters across, shiny even in the dim light. "At first, we thought he had contracted something from one of the patients here, so we started him on Pathonex and kept him in isolation. Unfortunately, the other symptoms he developed do not fit with any disease we have encountered before. We have compared it to every entry in the WHO pandemic database. No one has made a virus this way before." The healer leaned a bit closer to Ajobi, his mask hissing at regular intervals. "What other symptoms?" he asked. Enuma held the LS-411 card, blocking his view. Her voice grew stronger, a bit more resolved. "These," she said simply, dropping the card onto the bed. The healer straightened and looked towards the sealed window, the drawn curtains blocking the faint light from outside. "Your brother did not die within days. He must be a carrier, not a victim. Most of your diseases, they make longer the life of the vector, to infect more. You have done good in isolating him. You have slowed the spread." He paused. "It is usual for a vector to show symptoms. I have only seen this once before, where the host was bedridden." "How did it turn out?" Enuma asked. "Badly." "So what then?" Ajobi asked. "I'm not the vector. There was someone else before me?" The healer nodded and removed a black pouch from his belt. The two doctors became noticeably tense. He paused, hand over it, not opening it up, I will require a blood sample to verify. But in my experience, you do not look like a first-degree vector. Anuma's face betrayed a smile. Then you will leave him alone. You are only interested in the vector, yes? The healer stared at the black pouch for a moment. I have given you my word, he said quietly. But my directives are to eliminate hosts. I should euthanize him now. But you won't, Anuma said, uncertain. The healer only looked at her. No, he won't, Ajobi said weakly. And he won't draw any blood either. That is not what I said, the healer interrupted. Because if he does, I won't tell him who infected me. Both Anuma and the healer looked at Ajobi. Anuma's mouth hung open slightly. She took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. Ajobi, what are you? There was a man, an American. His name was Lewis. I never learned his last name. He was a junkie, a sickly old thing. I was working the pit alone when his girlfriend, a prostitute I think, came and begged me to check on him. He'd passed out, possibly from an overdose. She couldn't wake him, couldn't move him, but she'd brought her car, so she drove me to his house. When I got there, he was barely alive. I performed CPR and flushed his system with the tools I had, and he seemed to be recovering well enough. But when he came to, he was delirious, probably spooked by my hospital uniform. He stabbed me with a needle. Anuma covered her mouth in shock, sinking lower onto the bed. It didn't hurt. I didn't think much of it at the time. I flushed the wound, took the standard stopper dose of Pathonex, and moved on. You think he was your vector, the healer said. It would make sense. I got sick a few weeks after that. What else could it be? The healer looked at the black pouch for a moment. Where does Lewis live? Michalska, house number 21, I think. It had a green door. That much I remember. The healer took hold of the pouch, put it back into his belt, and did not look at either Anuma or Ajobi. He turned away, heading to the door, dust swirling in his wake. Will you come back? Anuma asked him. He stopped, looking at her, framed by banks of monitors and equipment flowing wires onto the floor. Pray, I do not, he said, and left. That was dangerous, Fanta, said Ajobi once they were sure the healer had gone. Anuma backed away from the door, returning to his side. Her eyes glistened with fear. I am sorry, Ajobi. I thought the lesions matched yours. I thought he might help you. You know healers don't help anyone but their own. He might have killed me. Fanta lowered her head, containing her crying. Ajobi patted her hand with his, weak and faltering. But it will be fine, he said softly. If he finds my vector, we might have hope. They have some of the best minds in the world working there. If anyone can crack it, they can. It's a long shot, but we can't lose hope. She smiled at him, but it was clear she didn't share his optimism anymore. How do you feel today? She asked. A bit better. I haven't got much left to vomit, and the sedatives help with the rest. No new lesions this week either. It's as close to progress as I can manage. Ajobi winced, shifting in bed. His heart monitor beeped erratically before settling. I will get more morphine, she said, but he caught her arm. Don't waste it on me. With any luck, that monster you found will have a cure for me. I would rather never see him again, Anuma confided. Neither would I, Ajobi said quietly. But somehow, I think we will. Motul Hospital, Prague, Czech Republic, November 28th. The corpse tipped into a black body bag, joining errant rainwater that was skirting off the roof into the alley. The workers, heavy masks strapped tight to their faces, tossed it around callously, their shoulder-long black gloves squeaking from the effort. Two of them stood impatiently above the other victim, blood long since drained. Sobotka took one last look, stood up, and they moved in for disposal, this time with yellow plastic. A sticker was glued to the head and toe, detailing the type and strength of the virus found in the body. The body bags were lazily added to a pile of other corpses, all color-coded, waist-high and exposed to the elements. Further down, the pile of yellow bags was being loaded into a flatbed truck. It would take several trips to clear that stack, as tall as it was. Sobotka walked down towards the mouth of the alley and joined Crew, who was interviewing a bruised old woman in bloodied clothes. Her eyes darted between them, but never at them, like she was talking to ghosts and not people. "A brown cloak?" Crew asked, tapping his pen on his notepad. "Anything else?" The old woman nodded furiously. Yes, a dark face, like a fly. He had no eyes and no soul. Crew smiled a bit, jotted notes. Sobotka checked his scribblings, then put a hand to the woman's shoulder. "Did he hurt you, ma'am?" "Number. No. Not me. Only Franz and what's his name? The one with the kids. They're upstairs, you know. He talks about them all the time." "I'm sure. So this dark-faced man, did he say anything to you?" "No words. Not to me. Though I heard a woman's voice. She spoke something. I can't say what. It was foreign." "Have you heard it before?" Sobotka asked, checking back at the crime scene. Yes, I have. I'm sure I have." Crew stood a bit straighter, frowning. "Where?" "In my nightmares. It was the devil. The devil. I'm sure of it." Sobotka rubbed the woman's grimy shoulder and kindly led her back to her campsite off the side of the hospital. "That's good, ma'am. Thank you. You've been a big help." Crew was kicking over a bottle of antiseptic into the bloodstains when she got to him. She looked at the large metal doors against the concrete facade, the piles of trash everywhere. "What do you think?" she asked, not making eye contact. "Same thing you do. It's gotta be." Sobotka's phone buzzed quietly, and she flipped it out, put it to her ear, taking a step back out of the rain. "Sobotka," she grunted. "Yes, sir. I think it is, sir, yes. A healer. It matches the description perfectly. No face, the cloak, the bloodbath." Crew's jaw set tightly. "Yes, sir." Sobotka nodded. "We understand. Completely, yes. Not a problem. We're on it." "So the Cap agrees?" Crew asked as she shut the phone. "We're good to go?" It wasn't the captain. It was Director Sestak. And we're not good to go. He's telling us to leave it alone. "Alone? We've got 2 dead bodies here, and who knows how many more coming. We can't just ignore it." "Are you kidding me? It was an order, Crew. And he's right. Healers are untouchable. If anyone found out we were even looking at investigating a healer, the bunch of us would be called up on charges by sundown. The rules come from too high up. Higher than us. Higher than Sestak." "What? God himself?" Crew smirked. "Look at you. All for defending the peasants, until the peasants meet some Chinese butcher, and then you're fine with it. Of course I'm not fine with it, shouted Sabatka, and the nearby crowds turned to stare. She lowered her voice, growling. But this is a fight you can't win, crew. Without the law on our side, at best we're on even footing with a healer. At best. And everything I've heard says he's got almost supernatural powers. You really want to go up against that? Crew grinned. I do. I really do. Look, I hate being pulled in 1,000 directions as much as you do, but that's what we get for not retiring with everyone else. We have to cover extra ground we don't want to cover. But what we don't do is go looking for trouble where there isn't any. This is trouble. You know that's not true. You heard that woman. The healer was talking to some woman, here in the hospital. That means he's got an accomplice. The president himself might be watching the healer's back, but there's nothing that says we have to let a Czech citizen call him in. To me, that's betraying your own. That's treason. You're insane. We'll never find a woman in a hospital of thousands, and we'll damn sure never be able to arrest her for talking to someone who is technically doing nothing wrong. You have no faith in the power of the badge, Sabatka. She growled, turned away, staring into the rain. The flatbed truck's gates clanged shut, its cargo full. Know what I'm thinking? Crew called to her. This isn't a coincidence. This joker shows up in the last days of November, right after we get that note. You can't be serious. What? It's beyond them? After this? After Russia? After what they did in their own backyard? It's the wrong MO. It doesn't fit. And you know it. We can't waste time on something like this, when there is a real threat out there that needs our attention. Listen, he's already put 2 more in the pile. I'm not letting him add any more. Crew motioned to the pile of yellow body bags. The truck chugged to life and started away, off to the incinerator. There were still hundreds of yellow body bags stacked in the road. Sabatka shook her head, slumping her shoulders. You're a fool. Crew shrugged. You with me, or do I do this alone? Sabatka shook her head, annoyed. We've got enough on our plates with the girl. That's our job. That's what we're paid to do. Sestak is waiting for results there. And it's a real public safety issue, crew. This question mark, this is just glory hunting. So I do it alone, then. Damn right, she said, burying her fists in her jacket pockets. A cold wind blew across the alley, whipping her hair into her face. She clenched her teeth to keep the shivers at bay. Crew stared at the ground, kicked at the dirt. You can't take the car if it's not official business, Sabatka grumbled. You're on foot. You're going to be out in the snow, looking for a ghost. You sure you want that? It's not going to snow, he said, pacing away from her, arms folded and chin out. It's only November. It'll slush a bit. I'll survive. Sabatka watched him go, shaking her head to herself. I'm not so sure, she said. Via Regnuso, 108, Modena, Italy, April 22nd, 1 year earlier. The lead snapped off the pencil mid-stroke, ripping a hole in the page. Ava brushed the fragments away, smudging the lines all around. It looked like a hole in the sky, a tear in space. She checked the actual sky outside her window, pale blue, with a few clouds drifting. Very different worlds. Her hands were shaking, but she tried to ignore it. Her legs were like sticks these days, so thin. The roundness she'd been teased for in university had all melted away, leaving a lean, almost sick-looking girl wrapped in a light jacket and jeans. She had just laid down the first lines on a new page when the door to the hotel room opened and Rodri entered, hands behind his back. His smile was contagious. She shut the sketchbook and hopped off the wicker chair, meeting him before he could kick his shoes off. "Guess what I found?" he asked with a sly grin, turning this way and that, keeping her from seeing behind him. "Magic beans," Eva teased, reaching around, meeting empty air as he dodged her. "Magic beans won't fill our bellies. Try again." Eva bit her lip, her stomach rumbling angrily. There was food in the room. This was no time for games. "If it's stale bread again, you're making way too much of a fuss about it." "It's not stale, and it's not bread. It's..." He held out a pair of red, shiny apples. "A treat." Eva could barely contain herself. She leapt at him, giving him a hug that made his back crack. He blew her bobbed hair off his face and laughed. "If you make me drop them, you're homeless. Got it?" "How did you find them?" Eva gasped, pulling back, taking an apple in her hands. "Last time I was down in the market, they were like 10 euros each. 11, actually. Inflation. Got the 2 for 20, though." Ava's face dropped slightly. She took a step back. 20. How did you get that much money? I thought we were saving that for emergencies. Things are tight, Rodri, and I don't know how much we can... It's not our emergency fund. That's the second bit of news. Eva crossed her arms. Do tell. Rodri took a large bite out of his apple, chewed noisily, a smile betraying how much he was enjoying it. After a few chomps, he explained, words slurring from the juice. I got a job. Eva leapt at him again, knocking him back a bit, wrapped her arms around him and kissed him hard on the mouth. Sweetness from the apple juice. He started laughing, kissed her back. So, you're happy for me then? How did you do it? There's a company in town. Where? I thought we'd checked everywhere and... You want to keep asking, or you want me to tell you? He teased. She unwrapped herself from him, threw herself on the bed, legs crossed, and started eating her own apple. It was magnificently sweet, made her warm in the brisk spring air. Rodri kept standing, foot tapping madly on the ground. He was full of excited energy, and it was infectious to watch. It's not the kind of work you're thinking. It's for a restaurant. You're cleaning dishes? No, not dishes. The owner wants to shut down his dining area for good. He lost a pair of waiters last month, and he's sick of it. So he put up this ad, says he needs couriers to deliver food to customers around this and a few other towns. Nice racket. All the money, none of the risk. Can't blame him. But yeah, I saw he was running it purely by phone-in, and I saw an opening. How many people have proper working mobile coverage these days, right? Not many. But how many people can still squeak out a data connection to their laptops? Clever, Eva said, her face bright with admiration. She started fidgeting as the apple was bitten down to the core. I talked him into letting me build him a website, complete with online ordering. Nothing too fancy, but it saves him having to hire a full-time receptionist. Pretty smart there, science boy. Rodri finished his apple, tossed the core from a distance into the garbage can. His eyes were twinkling. 800 euros, and I've got 2 weeks to work. 800! Just think of all the... Hold on, Eva, he said, sitting next to her, taking her hands in his. It's a lot right now, but I don't want to go through another year of starving like we have. I don't want an apple to be the highlight of my month. Hell, my year. We've got to be careful with this money. Ava nodded, avoiding his stare. She shrugged. I should probably get a job too, then. Help out more. You could be a courier for the restaurant. Just think. Running around town, delivering cold food to angry customers. Who needs a car when you've got spunk? She shoved him playfully. You're such a bastard, she grumbled. Actually, I was thinking I could find some paint and see about selling some more work downtown. I sold one this morning, straight out of my sketchbook, totally by chance. This middle-aged guy from out of town just wouldn't take no for an answer. Congrats! Which one? The one of Mazel by the river, Ava beamed. Ah, yeah. I could see that one being popular. She had that seductive look about her. Ava frowned at him. What seductive look? Oh, come on, you drew it. It was her whole come hither thing. Ava pushed him over by his face, crossing her arms in mock anger. He laughed. All I'm saying is that when you're living in a world like this, sometimes you want a little bit of the world the way it was, he said. These days, how many times are you going to be able to hook up with a sultry college girl with a body like that? Digging yourself deeper, Ava warned. I think hope sells, is what I mean. Or sex, said Ava. The hope of sex, then. Either way, it's a powerful thing. You should embrace it. Sell more work, spread a little joy, even if it is by proxy. Give the people what they want. Ava leaned over him, her nose touching his. Her hair made a bridge between them. His breath was sweet and warm, his eyes dancing across her face. People should give me what I want first, she breathed. What do you want? He asked, softly. You know damn well, she said, and they kissed, long and slow, in front of the open window, the pale blue sky filled with the sounds of passing ambulances. Praha 5 Police Station, Prague, Czech Republic, November 28th. Ava, wake up. Her vision was blurry, and she coughed violently as if she'd nearly drowned. Blinking, she forced her eyes to focus, barely making out the shape of a face above her. The green glow from the computer lit his haggard appearance. She gasped, squeezed her eyes shut, tried to shake herself back awake. Pyotr? She wheezed, her voice weak. Pyotr smiled nervously, nodded and brushed her cheek with rough hands. His hair was cut short, patchy like he'd done it himself. His eyes were ringed with creases, dark circles, tiny scars, the wear and tear of a living hell. They were still brilliantly blue, but the rest of him made the color feel tired, no longer vibrant. He wasn't the wiry kid she'd known at school. He was lean and muscular now, tougher. I'm sorry, Ava, he whispered. I didn't know it was you. Are you okay? Can you breathe? You choked me. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You look a lot different. I thought you were one of them. You might have found me. Where are we? The police station, he said, checking over his shoulder nervously. We've got to get moving. Can you walk? Ava got to her knees, her legs wobbling beneath her. She put a hand on the wall and yelped at a pain in her wrist. She held it close, tight, feeling the swelling. You hit it when you were fighting me, Pyotr said, his voice wavering with remorse. Can you bear it for now? Ava nodded, cradled the arm, and got to her feet. Pyotr stood next to her, supporting her with a well-toned arm, craning his neck to see out into the hallway. "It's good timing, you stopping by," he said softly. "Guess I'll have some company for Christmas after all." Mention of the holidays dragged Eva back to reality, and she backed up suddenly, her face blanching. "Oh my God, Pyotr!" she gasped. "We have to get out of here. There's a virus. An outbreak hitting here December 1st. Shh. Eva, quiet, or they'll hear us." Eva lowered her voice, but her eyes were wide with fear. "We can't stay here. We need to get out before it starts. Please, you have to help me." "I will, but—" "We have to find my mother and escape before—" Pyotr put a hand over her mouth, keeping her quiet while he checked down the hall. "I will, I promise. But for right now, shut up and move fast, or we'll be rotting in jail when the city explodes. Got it? Now move." A third-floor hideout. The windows were broken, shards strewn across the weather-worn carpet. Smoke still clung to the air, though the third-floor bedroom had been spared from the fire that gutted the rest of the building. The floor creaked when Eva stepped, so she walked gingerly, following Pyotr's precise path. "We don't have time, Pyotr," she urged. "We need to start looking for my mother, finding food to travel." "First things first," he interrupted, reaching a solid portion of the room and kneeling down on a mattress pressed against the wall. "We need to check your arm and get you fixed up. The way things are out there, you wouldn't last long like that." Eva didn't respond, so he grabbed her arm and rolled up her sleeve. She bit back a yelp of pain. Her wrist was purpling, noticeably swollen. Pyotr sighed. "Looks nasty. Sorry about that." She shrugged, then cried out loudly as he tried bending her hand up and down. He let go and started rummaging through his pockets, pulling out food packets, half a dozen marbles, a pair of pliers, and a bundle of beige elastic wrap. "You come prepared." Eva smiled. "This isn't what I usually use it for, but I think it'll do." He reached out to the nearby window ledge, grabbed a handful of snow, and carefully placed it on her arm. She was already so cold it barely registered, but as it melted, it made her skin tingle, like tiny fiery pinpricks. Eva looked up at him as he applied the second round of snow, shaking her head. "You look so different, Pyotr. Your hair is... It used to be beautiful." He shrugged, cocked his head. "Don't rub it in. It was getting too hard to manage without a bath. Took me days to get up the nerve to do it all in, with the edge of a tin can, no less." "It shows," Eva smiled. "The beard is new, too. You were always the clean one. It's just kind of strange to see you like this." "You look awfully new yourself," he said. "But long hair suits you, I think." "Thanks," she said. "I think it's awful." "Goes with the wrist." "Yeah," she sighed, catching some of the water dripping off her arm with the palm of her hand. Pyotr put another handful of snow on her, wiped his hands on his jacket, and picked up a food packet he'd removed earlier. "You keep that up until the ledge is clear, and I'll get us some dinner. A quick dinner, yes?" Eva nodded hesitantly. Pyotr tried to rip open the package, but it wouldn't give. "Stupid things never open right," he grumbled. "It's so good to see you," Eva said softly. "It's good to know someone here. Someone alive from the old days." "Yeah," was all she said. Pyotr did a mock roar and pulled furiously at the package, but it still wouldn't budge. He stomped an angry foot on the ground and leaned into it with all his strength. the wrapper foiling his every move. Ava laughed, shaking her head as she watched him. "You know, I used to have the biggest crush on you in first year," she said. That caught Pyotr off guard. Just at that moment, the package burst open, and half the ration skidded across the floor, stopping at Ava's feet. Pyotr stood there, stunned, then upset, then shocked. He looked at the other half in his hand and sighed. "That was sudden," he muttered, then handed her the safe half of the ration. "Here you go. Eat." Ava took the food with her good hand, giving a weak smile, which dissolved as Pyotr snatched up the other part from the ground and dusted the dirt off its bottom. "Don't," she said seriously. "It's not worth the risk." His blue eyes caught hers. He shrugged slightly. "I'll live," he replied, but she grabbed his arm with her swollen hand, wincing. "Don't be stupid. You can't know that. You can't risk that." Their eyes stayed locked. Pyotr dropped the food onto the ground and flicked it away under a chest of drawers. "Be careful with it this time," she warned. He smiled at her. She bit into the wafer, wincing at the taste, how it sucked the moisture from her mouth. "Yum," she sighed. "Stale strawberries." Pyotr laughed a big, booming laugh, more like old cardboard with strawberry extract. She smiled, then almost gagged on her second mouthful. "Pyotr." Ava hesitated. "Where's Mazel?" He looked toward the window. "She died a few months ago. Nuremberg syndrome. Out of nowhere." Ava blinked. "But, Pyotr, Nuremberg is highly contagious and airborne." He didn't face her, just stared at his hands. "Yeah," he said. "They warned me about that when they put me in quarantine." Naczelne, Prague, Czech Republic, November 28th. Ava gasped, moved away from Pyotr urgently. She had no mask, no protection. She covered her mouth with the sleeve of her sweater, taking shallow breaths. Slow, shallow breaths. The elastic started unraveling onto the floor. Pyotr didn't even notice her. "I spent 6 weeks in quarantine," he said. "Couldn't see another living person for 6 weeks. They shoved food in under the door, and all I had to do was knock twice a day to tell them I was still alive. Lived in my own shit. They torch each cell after you die, so why bother cleaning? After 5 weeks, I'm sure I'm near death. I'm losing my mind. I've lost so much weight. I'm on the verge of a massive breakdown. This doctor in a full biohazard suit comes in, takes some blood, and tells me Mazel died a week earlier. I can't see her. I can't see her at all. She's already being carted off to be incinerated, and all I get from her is the ring I got her when we got engaged." Ava didn't move her arm, but tears were in her eyes, and she blinked them back. A week later, the doctor comes back, tells me they've rerun my blood, and I'm clear for Nuremberg. It was a lab error the first time. I was fine. I could have been with her at the end, but they made a mistake. So she died alone, starving, drowning in her own shit. It's just wrong, Ava. It's so wrong." Ava carefully, gently, lowered her sleeve from her face, reached out towards Pyotr. He was still staring out the window, watching something that wasn't there. They sat in silence, the snow making no sound as it drifted onto the window ledge. Ava offered the last of the wafer to Pyotr. Are you hungry?" she asked quietly. Pyotr looked at the wafer, his eyes narrow, then carefully plucked it from her hand, perched it in his fingers, but didn't move to eat it. What were you doing at the police station? Was it business or pleasure? She laughed at this. Very much business, she said, leaning back on the mattress, the dampness making her shiver. They think I'm some master virus maker. You? He laughed. Our little Ava? You're joking, right? Wish you'd tell them that, she said, shaking her head. They don't believe me. Pyotr patted her knee, held his hand there a bit longer than necessary. They don't believe anyone, he said. I've noticed. But listen, we need to get moving. I have no idea where my mother is, and there isn't much time before the virus hits, whatever it is. You really trust cops? About this virus theory of theirs? Eva's eyes darted to the ground. I do. I wish I didn't, but I do. He nodded, started on her wrist again, wrapping faster this time. She gritted her teeth. Sit tight. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I'll make you useful again. Ava looked outside, the snow falling, then back to Pyotr. Thanks for this. I'd be lost here without a friend. A gust of wind outside blew drops of water into the room. Pyotr wiped it off his face. Don't worry about it. Thank you for warning me about the impending doom and all. Ava laughed. Sorry about the accommodations, by the way, he said, frowning. You interrupted my apartment hunting. The police keep the best list of vacant buildings in town, so I like to plan a little raid every so often to find some new digs. Why do you live like this anyway? She asked. My folks died 2 years ago. Battinger's D. I wasn't there, but you know, when the bank account stops getting filled, you kind of figure. God, I'm so sorry, Pyotr. It's okay, he said, but his expression said otherwise. Part of the package, right? Anyway, I made it this far home, ran out of money just east of Prague and had to turn back. Been living the life of adventure ever since. For how long? Almost 1.5 years, I guess. Can't afford a watch battery, he said, smiling again, showing her his stopped watch. Ava frowned at it, then pulled the wad of papers and cards out of her pocket, fished through them until she found a €100 note. She handed it over to him. Here you go, she said. Get yourself hooked up. It's on me. He took the money, waved it a bit, smirking. Now, all I've got to do is find some place that sells batteries, that's still open for business, and accepts cash. Yay. So it's really that bad here? They were still taking paper money in Stuttgart when I left a few days ago. What are you supposed to do then? How does anyone survive? They don't, mostly, said Pyotr seriously. But when you need food, there's a government stockroom across the Charles that's open most days. A lot of the packages are ripped open or otherwise trashed, but it's better than nothing. But for the rest... Yeah, it's not too good in Prague. Pockets of civilization next door to splashes of apocalypse. It's surreal sometimes. The only fully functioning facility left in town is the motel, and even that's not what it used to be. You got sick? Broke my arm. They set it in the parking lot and sent me home without pain meds, just in case. No x-rays, no follow-up. Too dangerous to go inside. Kind of like how I'm treating you, but I think they had medical degrees. Jesus, that's brutal, Ava whispered, glanced outside and noticed the snow was falling harder now. Pyotr put the final touches on the bandage and turned her arm around back and forth.
How's it feel?
He asked. Like utter crap, but well contained. That's what I'm going for. He smiled, then his expression changed. worry. "Ava, is this your passport?" "Yeah. Why?" Pyotr got to his feet with a start, looked around himself, then ran to the window, crunching glass as he went, leaned out. Ava stood up too, the room colder without the blanket, and watched as Pyotr threw the passport into the empty fireplace, kicked ashes onto it. "What's going on?" Ava asked as Pyotr started picking up his things, shoving stuff into his pockets. "You're 17.5, right?" he asked, and she flinched. "Yes. I mean, they keep saying—" "It means tag and trace," he said seriously, looking out the door to the landing. It had taken some work to make it up the fire-ravaged steps on the way here. Rushing down was not an option. They put a chip in your passport, so they can find you if they lose you. Ava looked back at the fireplace, at the ashes kicked around, then back at Pyotr, who suddenly shifted back into the room, a flashlight beam shining up from the floors below. "Ms. Kolokov," came a voice, calm and determined. "We've not done our chat yet." "Sobotka," growled Pyotr, backing up till window glass broke under his feet. He turned around, looked out the window. Ava was by his side in an instant, saw the fire escape, checked his expression. "We've got to get out of here," she said, swinging one leg over the window ledge and planting a foot on the rusted metal outside. She grabbed hold of the railing with her good hand and pulled herself out. The metal was slippery from the snow, and before she could stop it, she slipped sideways, landing on the windowsill on her right shoulder, the fragments of glass cutting into her skin. She called out in pain. Pyotr put his hand over her mouth before she could do much damage, a panicked look in his eyes. "You can't," he grunted. "I can't go back," she said, and pulled herself free. Na Celne, Prague, Czech Republic, November 28th. Ava's heel hit the ground, and for a moment she thought she had dropped 2 stories unscathed. But then her weight shifted. Her foot slipped on slick ice, and before she could react, her head hit the pavement. Pain shot pink and bright blue streaks across her vision. She blinked rapidly to regain her sight. She gasped at the pain, closed her eyes again and held them shut so tight it felt like her brains might collapse from the pressure. When she opened them again, she was floating, her arm wrapped over Pyotr's shoulders, her feet grazing the ground like they were pretending to walk. Shock set in, and she gripped into Pyotr's neck and gasped. He pulled her against a cold wall in the darkness, pushed her back and looked at her with a panicked face. "Don't make a sound," he whispered so quietly she almost didn't hear. She tried to calm herself, but her head was swimming, and something about it didn't seem real to her. And she shuddered, her head aching so intensely she had trouble seeing past it. To her right, a street. She was in an alley she didn't recognize, off a wide street without tire marks on it. Snow was melting from the buildings above, dripping down next to her, on her, and the tap, tap, tap of drops hitting puddles was mesmerizing. She almost didn't hear the footsteps in the street, cautious and careful. Pyotr put a hand down onto her stomach, pushed her back, and she fought against her delirium, kept herself still. She saw the figure through the pain. Sobotka, silhouetted by streetlights, standing at the edge of the alley, peering in. She checked over her shoulder, then back towards them. Ava didn't even breathe, heard her heartbeat in her ears, the sound of her head rubbing against brick. Sobotka pointed a light into the alley. Too far left, too far right. Then she settled on a spot just ahead of them, so close the beam was blinding. Water tapped, and Ava could hear Pyotr's slow breathing beside her, and his hand was pressing so strong into her stomach it hurt. The light wavered slightly, darted quickly toward them, and then swung back, away, and Sobotka was gone. Neither of them moved for a minute or more, and Ava put her hand on Pyotr's, took hold and tried to move it so she could breathe again. The pain came flooding back to her head in the absence of fear, and she nearly collapsed. She looked to Pyotr, who was still watching the street nervously. He reluctantly pulled his gaze away, saw her, smiled. "Are you okay?" he asked. Ava nodded, willing a calm facade. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved me." They moved deeper into the alley, took a turn to the right, then a few turns more that Eva only noticed in the corners of her mind. The pain kept coming in waves up her neck and into her eyes. They paused in a small, deserted courtyard, a bench bolted to giant slabs of concrete. Empty, broken wooden crates strewn everywhere. Ava smiled weakly at it, the refuge, and then promptly fell to her knees and vomited all over the slushy snow. Pyotr ran to her side, rubbing her back and carefully leading her to the bench, helping her down. She felt another wave coming on, but swallowed, tried to see past the pain in her head. "Concussion," she wheezed, spitting bile into the snow. Pyotr ran a hand across her cheek, looked nervous. "You're pale," he said, uncertain, probing for answers beyond his reach. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried holding her breath. "It's going to get worse," she gasped, and he gripped her hands tighter. "Wait a second," he said, rattling urgent fingers through his pockets. Eva doubled over and tried not to vomit again. She was counting to 10 for the third time when he found them. 2 large blue pills, dusted with lint. "Take these," he said gently. She squinted, looked up at him, her vision laced with light and pain. "What are they?" He put the pills in her hand, and she squeezed them tight as another shot of nausea stunned her. "It's called Tezoset, I think. Painkillers. Anti-inflammatory something." She nodded slightly, the motion causing unbearable pain. With a quick motion, she shoved the pills into her mouth, swallowed, then pushed the heels of her hands into her eyes, trying to focus past the agony so she wouldn't throw up again. Pyotr was rubbing her back, gentle circles counterclockwise, over and over. She felt the pain slide back, and she turned her head to him, opened her eyes, groggy. "Working," she said quietly. He nodded, smiled. "Where did you get those pills?" Ava asked, her vision not clearing but the pain almost a shadow of what it was. Pyotr looked down at the snow, guilty. "Mazel," he said simply. Somehow the cold was less frightening than it had been before, and Ava almost thought the sound of the wind on the rooftops above sounded muffled, somehow off. She took a deep breath, and her vision rippled with light. "Painkillers working," she slurred. "And strong." She fell into his arms, and he held her tight. "Listen, Ava," he said softly. "I know you and Rodri had your differences, but..." Ava's vision was so blurry suddenly, she couldn't see her own legs beneath her, and the fuzzy shapes around her were shifting and turning, and she felt so dizzy and sleepy it was hard to listen. "Sometimes you don't appreciate what you had till it's too late," she heard Pyotr say, but she didn't really know what it meant anymore. I need to find my mama, she sighed, and he caught her head as it fell backwards. Ava, can you hear me? Ava felt her eyes roll back in her head and fell as if she were sinking into a snowy field, with Pyotr somewhere out in the sky, calling her back to him. Motol Hospital, Prague, Czech Republic, November 28th. The cough was ragged, so grating it was surprising no blood came out with the mucus. Enuma held the plastic bowl close to his mouth and leaned him forward so it was all out. He gasped for air and fell back, lying on the sweaty mattress he called his home. His arms moved helplessly at his sides, waving back and forth as if he were drowning. The pit nurse checked her clipboard and glanced at the man's tag number. So, he had no ID on him? She asked, checking through papers quickly. None, said Enuma softly. He was dumped outside in a hospital gown. Cast-offs from Františku Hospital again? It could be. I have heard they are closing soon. The nurse sighed, flipped a few more pages, looked at the patient. So, what's his diagnosis? We need to find a place to move him. He's end stage, isn't he? Enuma urgently motioned for the nurse to follow her away from the bed, down a short distance to a spot where most of the patients were still asleep. Be careful what you say, she whispered angrily. He can hear you. But he is fully conscious. He knows what is happening to him, but he cannot control his body enough to tell us. His motor control is gone, his lungs are failing, and he is living with endless pain we cannot treat. Do not add to his misery. The nurse looked sufficiently chastised, met Enuma's eyes. Fine, I'm sorry, she grumbled. But what I want to know is if he's going to die soon, we'll leave him here. Otherwise, he's going upstairs. Enuma sighed, looked out over the floor. He will survive indefinitely. It is how it works. Upstairs, then, said the nurse and started to leave before Enuma caught her arm. She pulled a nearby IV bag towards her, twisted it. The side of the bag was wet, and a tiny drop fell off the edge when it moved. The nurse looked closer, too, mouth hanging open. How did this happen? Are these being reused? Enuma asked, squinting at it. Can't be. Those are fresh from upstairs. Must be a defect. Enuma let it go, frowned down the row of beds, their own bags dangling above patients like bulbous flowers in a field of white. Double-check the supply room. We will lose a great deal of volume if there are others like this. The nurse gave Enuma a withering look that went unnoticed. Yes, doctor. She glowered, then walked back to her muted patient, clipboard in hand. She kicked the brakes on the bed and began navigating it out of the room, clanging against other patients as she went. Enuma rubbed her eyes with weary hands, slow and agonizing. Long day, doctor? Asked a voice from behind her. She turned, saw an old man lying in bed, his face covered with boils so big he almost didn't look human anymore. Still, somewhere in the mass of distorted flesh were brown eyes, dancing. Every day is a long day, Enuma said to him, picking up his chart and glancing over it. How are you feeling today? As well as I should, I think. She checked his meds, eyed him cautiously. You are not depressed? Fatigued? Thoughts of suicide? The man laughed, or at least laughed as much as he could without being able to move his face to smile. Because I won't be on the cover of a fashion magazine? No, I'll live. Anuma laughed, clipped the chart back to his bed. Perhaps not a fashion magazine, but you should qualify for a medical journal write-up soon. It is widely assumed that Lumberger's causes depression as one of its symptoms. Apparently that is not the case. No, they're all just sad. They look like burnt mozzarella, he replied. Me, I'm used to being called ugly. I've been married for 50 years. Anuma smiled, patted him on a clear shoulder, and he patted her gloved hand back. Then she saw it. Another drop falling off the edge of his IV bag. She squeezed it gently and saw a tiny trickle from the side of the bag, running saline down onto her glove. Odd, she whispered. Another one. The patient tried to turn his head to see what she was looking at, but was prevented by his ailment. What's what? What's wrong? Anuma let go of the bag, shook her head. Nothing. We have to get you another bag. Some seem to be leaking for some reason. I will fetch a new one now, I think. Just wait a moment while I... Help! Came a shout from the far end of the room, and two paramedics in heavy masks burst in the doors, dragging a wretchedly battered woman in their arms, her chest all bloodied and her head hanging limp, bouncing lifelessly as they pulled her onto a stretcher. Anuma made a dash for them, saw Dr. Bastian hang up a chart and start running too. What happened? Anuma asked, swapping gloves and swinging her stethoscope around, checking vitals. White female, mid-20s, looks like a knife attack. 3 lacerations to the abdomen, 1 to the neck. They lifted some gauze off her neck, and blood sprayed out, making them both flinch. Hold it steady, she ordered. But if you are scared of blood, you are in the wrong job. Vitals. The paramedics scrambled to answer. Anuma ignored them, checked the wounds, probing with gentle fingers. Very deep. Liver, maybe. Vitals. Now. We couldn't check, said one of the paramedics, backing up again at the sight of blood. Anuma glared at him. Bag him or get out, she said coldly. How many? Dr. Bastian asked, arriving at her side, pulling on fresh gloves. 3 at the chest, 1 at the neck. Blood pressure? We do not know yet, she said, glaring at the paramedics. Dr. Bastian snuffed, knocked the brakes off the stretcher, and wheeled the patient over to the makeshift trauma area. Anuma kicked a pedal up and down near the bed, priming the generator. A short cough later, the lights came on, beaming bright white onto the blood. One of the paramedics had already disappeared. Do a blood test on her, for God's sake, Anuma hissed to the other paramedic. He nodded, pushed a portable testing unit against the woman's arm, and backed away as Dr. Bastian pushed his way in, feeling the chest wounds. Decreased lung function on the left, he said to Anuma, squinting as he listened, looked. Blood bubbled up and out of the cuts. The woman's eyes suddenly shot open, and the shock of what was happening to her made her convulse violently. She jerked upwards, trying to escape, gasped and coughed, spitting blood across herself and onto the doctors. Blood pressure dropping, Anuma called out, watching the monitor she'd hooked up herself. Dr. Bastian grabbed a scalpel off a tray, began work on the highest of the wounds. Anuma grabbed the suction tube and was about to hand it over when she noticed it was already bloody. She threw it to the ground. Suction contaminated, she growled. I will find another. I'm losing her pulse, Bastian said as the monitors wailed. Skip the suction. We need to stop the bleeding. Anuma nodded, passed him a new package of scalpels and gauze, and then swung back for a pack of clamps. The cart with supplies was too far away. She reached for it, but the monitors whined loudly, warning the patient was crashing. 20 cc's of Entophen, Bastion called, starting compressions. Enuma snatched a vial off the cart, punched a syringe into the needle dispenser, and drew serum. She aimed for a bulging vein on the patient's arm. The woman convulsed again, and Enuma's hand was hit so suddenly the needle missed its target and slid across the back of her right glove, ripping latex and hitting her skin. The paramedic gasped, but Enuma didn't flinch, tried again, and pushed the meds. The woman's heart rate started coming back up, and the monitor calmed, but the blood was still pouring from her wounds. "I need suction," Bastion called, already cutting and probing without the aid of the clamps Enuma had missed. She pulled off her gloves, opened a drawer with her fingertips, removed a packaged suction head, and swapped out the old one. She handed it over to Bastion, who took it without looking. The back of her hand was bleeding slightly, but she ignored it, threw on a new set of gloves, and rejoined the crisis. The paramedic eyed her anxiously. "You will need a packer," she said, checking the stats. She started to go back to the cupboard, but Bastion caught her hand, letting the suction drop out and away, and twisted it so he could see the blood beneath her glove. "When did this happen?" he said gravely. "Just now," she offered, tried to pull away. "Fanta," he said, holding tight. "When?" She met his eyes, cold and unforgiving. "Yes, I came in contact," she admitted. Bastion pushed down on the wound he was working on to stop the bleeding, waved a bloodied hand out to the paramedic. "Give me the test results," he shouted. The paramedic was startled, jumped up, and almost tossed the device towards Bastion, who caught it deftly and quickly paged through screens. "TBG-14, he sighed, threw the device at the side of the bed, then looked at Enuma. "Go clean that, and stay away from the patient, Fanta." Enuma shook her head, grabbed the suction, started back. Bastion caught her wrist, squeezed. "Doctor, Enuma, leave the room." "You need me." "Find Dr. LaRoche," Bastion barked at the paramedic. "Now!" Enuma tried to break free, but she wasn't nearly as strong as the old man. His eyes were cold and menacing. "It is a tiny scratch," she tried. "You need me now." "TBG-14 could kill you," he boomed. "You don't have the antibodies. Someone else will take your place. That's final. Now back away so I can save this patient." The ferocity of it made her flinch, and she reluctantly stepped back, held her hand gingerly, watched him work on his own. "TBG is not the same as tuberculosis," she said quietly. "I am in virtually no danger of contracting it from her." "Virtually is not absolutely, Fanta. There's a very large gulf between them, one I've lost many colleagues to." She didn't want to leave, hesitated, but saw he wouldn't hear any more objections. She nodded, slightly, turned halfway. "I will go clean this out, and find Dr. LaRoche." He didn't reply, just kept working. She stormed into the side room and hit the water on harder than she needed to. She started scrubbing disinfectant onto her hands, her teeth clenched shut, and her eyes not watching what she was doing. She heard the sound of the monitors coding again, and though Dr. LaRoche ran past her as she stood there, by the sounds and shouts and panic in the air, she knew it was too late. She gripped the edge of the sink, her head bowed, and refused to cry.